Yeah, so there's a organization called Millvet Startups, and I think they either partner with or they're an offshoot of a vet-focused venture capital firm called Context Ventures, and they put on a couple of pretty awesome events. And again, I'm not here to pitch them; I don't have any association with them, but one of which is they have like an annual Millvet startup conference in San Francisco. And then the other, which I've never attended before, but it's this consumer focused conference. So I'll be going there for the first time. I don't have the opportunity to attend many of these kind of conferences or trade shows. So it'll be a cool experience just showing up and pitching for the first time.
It's funny that you bring that up. The name clicked with me right away. I just recorded an episode with Brendan Aronson, who
Oh,
is,
yeah, that's the dude. Yeah.
yeah, that is the dude. Yeah, he's great. And we talk all about Milvad and like their events and stuff. So that's fantastic that you're getting involved with that. What are the details of is there like a is it a prize thing? Is it pitching to potentially solicit investors, or what is an ideal outcome for you?
Yeah, I guess so. I'm in a pretty specific situation in that I still have a day job, and we can certainly talk about that more. But I've been bootstrapping RecPak for the entire time. I think I'll do that for the foreseeable future. And so for me, it's just really an opportunity to get out there and see what other folks are doing, what kind of like that veteran ecosystem, startup ecosystem looks like. And then also there's a couple of roles that I'm looking to bring folks on at RecPak, at least on a part-time basis. And if I could meet some good people out there, that would be really awesome.
What kind of roles are you looking to bring on? Maybe we'll have a little marketing for you here. What is who are you looking
Well,
to hire for?
it is hard to find good folks, and I have a lot of opinions about the whole gig economy thing. When you're starting off in a consumer brand, there's all this, I think, hype around you. You can just go on Upwork or any of these other platforms and find somebody to do really anything, and that is true. You could certainly find somebody, but whether they will be effective, worth the resources that you're putting into them is another thing. And I've found that for each role type, I've had to bring on and offload at least 1 to 2 folks before I've found somebody that really works. So now, as we're starting to grow, I'm looking at folks for growth marketing to assist potentially with like social media stuff and maybe even operations, because that's like a whole thing that's coming up with this upcoming production batch that we're on.
That's super exciting. Bringing on more people is usually a good sign of growth. And yeah, if anybody listening is looking for a new role and passionate about that space, reach out. That's super cool. We're going to talk a ton about RecPak today and get into all the nitty gritties of CPG businesses and you're pursuing like a pretty interesting problem. Maybe before we get into that, maybe take a couple minutes and give me high level overview of what gets you starting this brand to begin with.
Yeah, I was in the Marine Corps and I did a couple of different things. I was in from 2009 to 2016. And one of my roles was leading a sniper platoon. And it's as you would imagine, where you have teams out there that are going out in the field on operations for days, if not weeks on end. And so space and weight in their packs is, of course, really prioritized. And they're often in their hide sites. If you have eyes on a target, you might be in that position for a long period of time. And so you don't have the luxury of breaking out an MRE or some boiling water or anything like that. And your snacks, back in the day, what we used to call pogey bait, that stuff gets pretty old. And also not that nutritious. You wouldn't have a bunch of energy bars and just consider that a meal. And so this was also around the time that all these meal replacement companies had started to come out. So you might have heard of Soylent and Huel and all of those. This was way back when it was just Soylent. And the entire concept is you just have your complete nutrition that is in powder form, and they ship you a big bag, and that bag would be this nutritional formulation that was for the quote unquote average adult that they got from the FDA. And so I would take it out with a shaker bottle. And I started to realize that for folks like me, we needed our own kind of formula, a more specific or optimized formulation. Folks like me being if you're out there in these kinds of remote environments doing endurance type activities, and also just bringing a big bag with a shaker bottle wasn't really effective.
Not conducive to concealing your position either, like shaking your
E exactly, yeah, and now you start to see them more in the supermarkets, whether they hold random stuff like kids' applesauce or bags of rice or some stuff like that, but especially back then, the stand-up pouch was pretty rare, although it was very common in Asia. I started doing some research and realized, and it's to this day, that there weren't any brands that had the pouch itself was the receptacle that somebody could access, could drink from, with the exception, of course, of applesauce for kids. But unless, and obviously some adults are love those as well, but generally that's about it. So I just thought of the stand-up pouch as this very durable, but flexible and lightweight container that could hold a full meal's worth of this powder, and that's how RecPak was born. So that was the original inspiration, and I had the idea when I was still in, and it wasn't until I got out a couple years later that I started to just slowly work on it as a side project. And it wasn't necessarily because I absolutely was like so passionate about nutrition, but it was because I wanted to really build something and understand what it was like to take something from just an idea all the way to launching it. And it was a pretty slow process going through all the product development and hiring folks to help me with really all aspects of the development because I was so new. So yeah, that was the original inspiration, and I could certainly dive deep on the path to where we are today as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. What is the driver behind wanting to just tinker on the side? I'm always like interested. You've got a problem presented to you, but there is a large gap in people that are willing to just like bitch and moan about a problem, and then those that are actually like, oh, I need to go out and like research these different ways of things that could solve this problem. What is the are you I know that you have maybe post your military career, you did all of the things you're supposed to do, went and got an MBA and worked at all the tech companies and stuff like that, and usually aiming towards some sort of startup. Was it like a financial motivator for you in any way, or was it just like oh, this might be fun?
More so the latter. And I guess also the fun being, I guess, like in an outdoor context, they call it the type 2 fun because certainly in the moment, a lot of this is not is not fun. It's more, I guess, the fun of the challenge. But you really have to have your why. For me, it's certainly not financially motivated because I think the easy thing would be to just get, if that was the case, like the highest paying job that you could. And yeah, and again, that's totally fine for folks. But I think for me, it wasn't even the specific problem set. My why was, I guess, the entire experience of taking that something from its core idea and then seeing how far I could take it. And then also, I always wanted to create something that had a social mission. And so if I could create something that was successful that people really loved, and then in turn give back to the communities and the causes that I cared about. That would is some those are the things that really kept me going, and still do to this day. Because when you're doing something on your own, and I'm sure it's the same with you and the podcast, there's going to be so many challenging days where you just don't feel like doing the things that you need to do. And so you really need to have that core reason of why you're doing it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Those days where you need to send all the emails and make all the calls and do all the testing I'm sure that you have to do with something like this. It just, there are days that it sucks. And I, that when they talk about entrepreneurship being like a lonely road, I think I used to not laugh about that at the beginning, but at least in jest as, oh, like you're pursuing something so exciting. The reality is down the road, you're doing something that nobody else can identify with you. You're trying to explain to other people why you maybe see the world differently or think that something ought to exist that currently doesn't. And it sucks. There are just, like you said, there's a lot of those days. And yeah, it's not that fun sometimes.
Yeah, and I think we're so conditioned. I think everybody understands, "Oh, okay, like you're starting on your own off on your own thing. That's gonna be really challenging, and there will be these lonely times and all of that." But I think all of the media and what we hear are from the entrepreneurs that got who they made it on the other side. So like the I don't know what you would want to say, like the 1%, the 5% who started off with their idea and then that they really struggled, but then they just kept at it and then they're successful. So when you're starting off, you're like, "Oh, okay, I know that I'm gonna struggle." But you don't I think the challenging part is when you're really in it, and then in the struggle, you start thinking, "Man, maybe I'm going to be the 95 or the 99% that is not going to make it." That's when it really hits you, and you really, again, have to have that reason why in order to keep you going. And then there's also the I think the other piece of the uncertainty is I think when you're first starting out, you think either I'm going to be successful, in which case I'll just keep on going, or I'm going to have all those signals that, or certain signals that it's not working, in which case I'll walk away. And what the challenge is that you're probably not gonna have that kind of binary decision. You're not gonna be it's very unlikely that you are just gonna have this crazy this idea that just goes super viral. It may happen, but chances are that it's not, at least initially. And then on the other hand, you might have a little bit of traction, or you might have like just enough information where you're like, huh, this still could be something. This is not a, I'm not doing as well as I wanted, but it's not a complete failure. And so the other challenge is how do you keep going? If so, like how hard do you keep going? Because oftentimes you're just never going to know whether to quit or not. And then again, it just goes back to just like digging down and deep and asking yourself, why are you doing this? And if it works, if what you are doing is fulfilling the things that make you personally happy and fulfilled and whatnot, then that should be enough to keep going. And if it's not, even if you are achieving some like metrics that you put down on paper or some like external success, if you're miserable, maybe that's a consideration that you should stop as well. So it's a lot more complex than when you initially started it out.
It is weird, and you make such a good point about that because you get into these really existential things. It's not just, "Oh, I'm gonna go build this company or do this thing." It's like, you get in and you just start questioning everything. Your like, your job, your life, because it's very all-consuming. It touches all of those parts of your life. Do you know who, Patrick O'Shaughnessy is?
I don't think so.
Okay, who he is not really totally important for this conversation, but he has this idea and he talks about this thing. He's like an investor and kind of has done all these interesting things, but he talks about the idea of somebody's life's work a lot. And I had to pull up what somebody's life's work is. He calls it a lifelong quest to build something for others that expresses who you are. And
Mm,
he said that one of the ways that he likes to gauge those, he runs like a early stage venture fund and he looks for people exclusively that are pursuing quote unquote their life's work. And one of the questions that he likes to use as like a gauge for that is like if you're doing something, is there any amount of money that you could be paid to not do that? And that
yeah.
is like an unbelievable gauge of, oh, I'm pursuing RecPak. If somebody handed you $1 billion to stop building that, would you stop? And that is like a really interesting gauge and probably a useful exercise for, I know that I've used it doing the podcast, like on those hard days. It's what's more important here? Is it the money that I'm after, or how important is this thing that I'm working on?
Yeah, yeah, I think I have heard that, and there are some startups, I think we've all heard of Zappos, where they'll pay their interviewers or interviewees like $2,000 or something to not accept the job as sort of like a test of their commitment to the program. But, yeah, that is a really interesting concept is when you're starting off is what would your walkaway price be? I have not thought about that because again, I don't really, I honestly don't consider this as like a money making endeavor or opportunity. But I think it is, I think the important question, at least for me and maybe for folks in a similar position, are less like the money, but what are the conditions in life? Like what else could happen in life that would get you to walk away. So if you had like this amazing corporate job that popped up or like the opportunity to travel the world for 2 years or whatever, would you give that what you're doing up for something what for those opportunities? Because that's the other thing is just the time commitment stuff because those things will either come up as you continue on with your endeavor, or you will have to consciously decide to not pursue a lot of those other life experiences in order to focus on your endeavor.
Hmm. It's an interesting problem for, I don't want to say high performers exclusively, but certainly internal locus of control people where you at the beginning when you're first starting, you think that there's all these constraints of like money and all of the people that are in your way of accomplishing something. And then as you get further down the road, you're like, oh no, it's actually just time. Like,
Mhm.
I am so limited, and it's a personal worry of mine. I was just telling a friend the other day on a podcast, I was like, "Man, I'm worried that I'm not gonna have enough time to do what I wanna do in life because there is just it's very finite, and you only get maybe 2 or 3 big callings like this, maybe in a lifetime, if that, and so choose carefully."
Yeah, life is about prioritization, right? I think that's where it just goes back to what is your why? And if you have a really strong answer for that, then you can return to that when somebody is saying, "Hey, do you want to, I don't know, go to Europe for a month or whatever your other life's goals are?" You can return to that why. But if that why either isn't strong to begin with or it weakens over time, then you start thinking about all those other things that you would like to do, and then you look at the tasks that should be or that you need to be doing for your thing that you're working on. And for me in particular, the amount of time because we at least for this first production batch, I do all my own fulfillment. So like the amount of time that I've sat there like making boxes and applying labels and stuff, I'm like I could literally be doing anything else with this time that would be more fulfilling in life. But this is just what I have to do. So I don't even think about it.
Th They're packaged with love, though, so
They are. And a
you know that
handwritten
we're
with a handwritten card too.
oh, man, something about marketing. That's,
Oh
there's
yeah.
nothing
Well,
that'll seal the deal.
for your viewers, we've actually just started applying stickers, so you get your free sticker as
Oh,
well,
there we go.
six pack and above. So how about that for sales?
There we go, I like it. You were talking a few minutes ago about looking for early indicators of, like, traction, and you're maybe not in need of that because you've got this kinda different why. Let's talk maybe from a product perspective. What is it that you saw early on that at least you can be serving this higher mission, but you still need product market fit? That doesn't make you immune to that.
For
So,
sure.
one, do you think you have that? And two, what were some of the early signs that you think that you hit?
Yeah. Man, that's a really tough question, or rather getting that product and market validation is one of the toughest things because you again, in the ideal state there's a concept of the minimum viable product. And I think that certainly applies to hardware or physical products, but the like when they present it, it's always like around software. So let's say you're designing and you have an idea of an app, and it's old school, but you have this app idea, and so the idea is you create this MVP, and then you provide that to folks to play around with and use, and then based off of certain reactions around that, then you can start like slowly building and iterating on this MVP, and you get your product market fit, or at least your product validation in that way. For me, it was much more difficult because I was always questioning, what does that actually look like? Let's say I have this, because I would buy these pouches off of Amazon, and then I would mix these ingredients, which weren't the ingredients that I was ultimately going to use, but they were stand-ins. And so I'd have this bag of ingredients, this janky bag of ingredients that I would give to friends and whoever, and then be like, "Would you use this?" And then they'd be like, "Yeah, sure. This seems like an interesting concept." And I would talk to other folks that were in the target segments that I was certainly targeting. And so some you have a baseline amount of, I guess, product validation of, oh, this might be something that people could use if I can actually give them the product that is going to be useful for them in a sense. And so from those initial conversations, I knew that I was onto something. And then I also looked at the competition being at that point, just like we'll say like the Soylents of the world. And so I thought Soylent and these other companies are creating these multi-million, we'll say like in the tens or hundreds of dollars in revenue. And if they could do that for these software Silicon Valley types that just don't feel like eating, I have all these folks that really would need this stuff when they're in the outdoors. And so that gave me further validation. But at the end of the day, I just had to make it and build the thing myself and then launch it and take a huge risk. And I'm not sure that was the right way to go, but ultimately, at least I think that it panned out. So it was a lot of upfront cost initially. And so that's a really tough thing if you are trying to introduce and I'm not saying RecPak is super novel. At the end of the day, it's powder in a bag. We have a formulation that I worked with a couple top clinical nutritionists who spent a lot of time in endurance sports and work with military special operations, one of whom was actually the dietitian for the Steelers. So I was really confident in our nutritional formulation. I worked with a couple top food scientists and a packaging engineer. And so there was just so much upfront cost that I think that if I didn't have such a strong intuition that this was going to work, it would be a very big risk, at least personally, financially, and time wise, in order to do all this work and then you get it out there and then it's a dud. So I will readily acknowledge it was definitely a risk that maybe other folks could have mitigated some of that risk in a smarter way. I'm not sure. But ultimately, what I ended up doing was I went through a couple of years of product development and things got delayed with COVID and everything. But I then launched it on Kickstarter, and Kickstarter is a whole other conversation. It was a nightmare experience, but we ended up raising enough. And did I re I didn't even come close to recouping any of the money, like, the money that I had put into it already with Kickstarter. Like, it was not a fi Kickstarter is not a financially viable thing unless your product is really gonna take off. But the one thing that it did do was that it served as a forcing function so that I knew that I couldn't delay things any longer or move it at, a slower pace. I had folks that were waiting for this order and that I just needed to deliver. And so that was the second sort of phase of the validation was, you know, initially friends and family and contacts I knew that were in that space, just running the idea by them. And I did a couple of smaller pilot productions and got really good feedback from that. And then it was Kickstarter, in which I was just, hey, you're a random stranger on the internet. Check out this ad or see our Kickstarter campaign. And if there was enough people that were interested in the concept. So that was like the second major source of validation. And then the third was when we actually launched the product. So did a full production batch and I just put it all out there, ran ads on the internet, sent out a bunch of samples. And that was probably the most scary part was like, you finally, after all of this time and all this development, hundreds of people, now thousands of people have had this product in their hands. And you're just hoping at that point that people like it. And so far, I think that they do. So we're just going to keep on going.
Yeah, the amount of steps that you just described over like that time period, I have to imagine there's just so much there to
I
get
get
it
exhausted
exactly
even
right.
hearing myself.
uh, you were saying that you like started just like making the batches at home. What were
Mhm.
would you say that you were at like all in cost to get the packaging engineer and the nutritionist and stuff? I just looked up your Kickstarter campaign. It looks like you, whenever this was a couple years ago, 2021 says you raised like 10,500 bucks, maybe 11 grand
That's a pittance compared to what I had to put into it. That was
of
more I
pittance.
think Kickstarter is a really expensive way to get pre-orders. Would not a whole other conversation, would not recommend doing Kickstarter unless under very specific circumstances. But what did I put all in? Let's just say that I saved a lot of money when I was on deployment and just throughout the years. And I have certainly run through most of that. So now I think we're on a path to profitability, but yeah, unless you raise money, just be prepared to just or if you just are able to do everything on the cheap in certain ways, just be prepared to run through your savings pretty quickly.
Do you think that RecPak is a venture backable idea?
Yeah, for sure. Why I don't now is because I don't really need to, and because, yeah, I still have a day job, and so I don't think VCs are gonna take too kindly of that, which is totally fine. But, yeah, I think anything that where you have a concept or a product that you can scale at a certain level, you're viable for somebody to give you money. I don't yet know what that would look like, but I think that the time in which we would do that would really be okay, we are ready for a big nationwide push, as an example. But yeah, I think I can keep on just relying on my savings and whatnot until then.
Give me, I know that you said it's a whole other conversation. Give me like a couple minutes about why Kickstarter is no good. You said it was an expensive way to get a bunch of pre-orders. Here, I guess here's my knowledge of Kickstarter. Like you're only getting the money if you get fully funded and they like probably take some sort of cut, I'm guessing, of whatever you
Yeah.
produce. What is it that like created such a negative experience for you? 'Cause I've
Yeah.
also heard, like, a lot of mixed reviews about people using Kickstarter, so
Yeah. I mean, whether you have a line of popsicles or the next genetically modified, medicine or whatever, you have a customer base and you need to access that customer base through a variety of channels. And it's going to cost you either in time and or money to build out that channel. And so for Kickstarter, you're saying they offer this platform that makes it that sort of facilitates raising money, but really what you're after is their group of Kickstarter aficionados or however you want their user base. And so that's the channel that you're accessing or purchasing essentially. The problem is unless you're in, I think, certain products, I don't know, and I'm just balling, but like if you're like a tabletop game or maybe you're like a consumer electronic that you know how to tweak those knobs and go viral on Kickstarter, it does not make sense. Like they're always in the Kickstarter application, they're like, "Hey, make sure you bring your friends and family and everybody make sure that they back you." And you're like, "Yeah, like I could have done that if I just had a website." you should always plan on, I think, of the total that you raise, and we found this to be true as well. I think it's something like Kickstarter backers will be like a third of your total money raised. And so all of the by the time that you go through all like the marketing and the hype and all that kind of stuff to bring people to Kickstarter, I think that there's just at this point, unless you're very confident that or at least somewhat confident that you can go viral on Kickstarter, and there's just very specific ways of doing that, then there's just other ways that are much more efficient. And I think that involves just looking at those different channels and saying, okay, like of the potential customers, what are the best channels to access those customers? And it's probably not Kickstarter. So if you're a food as an example, like most at least a lot of these smaller foods, they start off in like farmers markets. Or for RecPak, if I could do it all over again, I probably would just have my own just straight landing page and just funnel people there and give out free samples at the trailhead or something like that. So I think it's identifying what those channels are, and if Kickstarter is one of those channels, then great, and go and do that. But my guess is it's probably not.
Yeah, I have heard a lot of interesting success stories about on Kickstarter. A lot of them have to do with the subjects that you mentioned. The weird niche electronics and tabletop games seem to do really well on that website. And I'm sure that there's some maybe other subjects or categories that do, but there is a lot of projects on there that are unfunded.
Yeah, and then the thing is, we did this, even if you are funded, you're always like probably the true cost or what you really want to raise is always going to be far lower than or sorry, far higher than what your funding goal is because you want the Kickstarter algorithm to say, "Oh my gosh, this project was funded in just a few hours." And so you're naturally going to have it super low so you can hit that and then it becomes this success that then builds on more success. Yeah, that's just, I don't know, some Kickstarter insider baseball.
So, was there anything that you maybe haven't covered already that if you were to do a product launch again, that you would maybe do differently? You said you would set up a landing page and funnel people there, and then maybe from there, it's maybe gets more specific about who your target audience is and where they hang out. Any other interesting, I hate to call them growth hacks or things like that, that you would try to pursue if you were launching again tomorrow?
I feel like advice is generally the best when it's very tactical, very specific. So I certainly can do that for the CPG or the food space. I think just in general, though, if you're looking at, oh, I have an idea, what is the best way to get this to market? There's a ton of already super established books out there. So I think for
You can't be mentioning books. What ones are they? What just so we
yeah,
can
no, I was actually I took a pause because I was trying to remember all the there was a period of when it was probably like 2016 when I just read like 100 of these. There's like Steve Blank, Eric Ries, Peter Thiel's 0 to 1, just all of the classics that even if it doesn't I would start with those because even if they're not directly applicable to you, you understand there is a pattern to all of this of customer acquisition or identification and acquisition. And there's all these kind of like baseline truths that they will reveal, I guess you could say, so that even if a lot of their advice isn't applicable to you at that day-to-day tactical level, when you're first starting out, you can really understand what the whole process is or what those patterns look like.
Yeah, a lot of the fundamentals don't really change, and, like, at that stage, you really are wrestling with you're trying to get something specific, but you really need to look broad too and look for the big gaping holes in your strategy.
Yeah, it's super basic, but the thing that I often think about is just if you're going to eat an elephant, you just got to do it one bite at a time. And it's so overwhelming, especially when you're starting off, where you just have so many different potential things to focus on and different articles to read and all of that. And you can really get caught up in going down rabbit holes that are not that are not applicable to what you're working on right now. So I think if you just start off with here's my ultimate goal, and then what do I need to do right now in order to achieve that goal? And then you can break that down into subtasks. And you just like day by day, you're just eating that elephant and knocking out those very individual tasks. Eventually, all of that will come together. And sometimes I'll reflect on how far, like, it took a while for me to get here and I'm just beginning, but I'll reflect on just how much of those just small tasks every day that I focused on for it to all come together.
So you've been working diligently on getting this product to market, and like things have really started dialing in, I guess, over like the last year to two. Where are you today? And maybe see if you can give me a sense of size and scale of the company, maybe how many units you've shipped or sold, and then like where your next big targets are.
Yeah. So, of course, I still consider ourselves, we're just getting started. And the very fact that I'm still packing each box with love should be an indicator of where we're at. But fortunately, I'm packing quite a few of those boxes with love and not just one or two every day. So I look at there's three overall channels that I'd like to for us to go for. The first is e-commerce, and this is applicable. I want to make this applicable to really any consumer brand or CPG or at least food or shelf stable food. But there's e-commerce, and that is probably the easiest to get on or access, right? Like it literally just requires a landing page and then you just run Facebook ads. Same thing with Amazon, but you're going to pay for those customers pretty significantly, at least up front. So that's where we are now, where most of our sales are direct to consumer, whether that's through our website or through Amazon. And we're also on a couple of other like third party channels. Then there's brick and mortar retail, and that's everything from small outdoor shops to REI and Bass Pro Shops and everything. And so the goal is bigger retail at some point, but right now we're starting off in a few just smaller stores. And I think for retail or for other retail brands that might be interested, I think again, it's about identifying those channels and those potential channel partners that make sense for your company at that time. So I think a lot of folks they say, why don't you just go straight into your retail? And for us, that would be REI. Maybe if you have a lemonade company, that would be Whole Foods or something. But you have to choose your channels you have to be at your channels at the right place at the right time. Because oftentimes if you mess that up, then getting back or rebounding from that is a lot harder than if you had just the patience and tackled those when you were ready.
If I can jump in there, why does that matter? Is it like an operational roadblock? If you just get your first batch of product and you go to REI and they say, oh, okay, we want 10,000. Is that what you're talking about? Like being at a scale where you're able to support that? Or what are you talking about specifically?
Yeah, so it's both operational, and then there's also just especially with CPG, it's a pretty cutthroat. Like to get on a shelf where you're competing is pretty cutthroat, and so if you botch your intro, like you end up on the shelves and you don't have the experience or the wherewithal to hold your position and be successful, then it might be a very steep climb for you to get back on if they've booted you off.
So you're saying that if you get onto the shelf and maybe you don't make enough sales right off the bat for whatever reason, maybe your packaging is not great or like the logo doesn't pop enough compared to the other brands that it's surrounded by, or maybe even where it sits on the shelf, then
Exactly.
they're going to boot you and then they're not going to be very keen to bring you back.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. So I'm trying to be very strategic about that. And then the last channel that I think would be really cool. Ultimately, I created the product to help folks who are in those kind of outdoor environments or where they need more complete nutrition as part of their profession. So think of like military, search and rescue, other public safety, wildland firefighting, that kind of thing. So I think it would be really cool to ultimately be able to serve them directly. Right now, a pretty good portion of our customer base are individual folks from those communities, but it would be cool to be able to support them more directly.
A few episodes back, I had on a guy named Greg Fisher who started a barbecue sauces and rubs company. And we went down the rabbit hole of he didn't really have any great things to say about being on Amazon and like the costs associated with that, especially with Amazon doing the fulfillment portion. It's brutal on returns, reviews, like it's just the whole gamut. How have you thought about the importance of your customer mix when it comes to either direct to consumer or like a third party channel? Is direct to consumer like that much more valuable? And like maybe how should people be thinking about balancing the distribution of being on like an Amazon as opposed to trying to create a relationship directly with them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And again, I think it all just goes back to whatever channel you're going to focus on, you need to really understand that channel and why you're doing it. So I can imagine for a barbecue sauce company, maybe it's like a liquid, so glass, it's heavier, it's more liable to break, more difficult to ship, all of that. I could totally see Amazon not making sense. Whereas for us, we're a pretty durable product. We're more lightweight, and for us, Amazon is not our only e-commerce channel. We're also it's still primarily through our website, but I view it as a balance between Amazon is accessing folks who so how let me take a step back. How we currently access folks through the website are they see a social media ad or they see some story or whatever on social media and they say, "Oh, okay, that looks interesting. Let me go to their website. I'll check them out and I may be interested in making a purchase or I may not. And if I do, then it's just to sample things." And when they do make that purchase, of course, I now have their email. I've got some level of customer data. I can now retarget them with emails. And of course, often I will have to pay for that customer to show up to the website with the sort of the entry fee is the ad spend that we've done. Whereas Amazon, yes, Amazon takes a cut and I don't get their customer data, but there are folks who are on that site. If you're on Amazon, chances are you are there to make a purchase. And so if they say, "Oh, I'm looking for camping meals," and then RecPak pops up, they are more likely, at least I think this is the theory, that they are more likely to make larger purchases. So I will not have developed that direct relationship with them, but it's a good way of moving larger quantities of product. And so again, I just go back to it just depends on what you have to look at each channel and understand what it's for. And there's other channels where it might not be you might be very few sales, but maybe that channel just gets a lot of eyes on it or visibility for you. This is not necessarily a sales channel, but we'll say like PR. Like you could run a lot of Facebook ads and you could very directly attribute, you can say, okay, I spent $10,000 on ads. I got $50,000 in sales. That's my return. For PR, maybe you spend $2,000 on to in product to ship out or X amount of you spend a lot of time reaching out and whatnot, and you don't know what that return is. You don't know what that you can't correlate it directly, but maybe it is getting your product out there to in front of new eyes for the first time so that when they do go to Amazon or see your ad on Facebook or whatever, they say, "Oh, okay, I've seen this before." And so there's a benefit there that can't really be quantified. That's why this stuff ends up just being such a crapshoot half the time. It takes a long time to figure out, is this thing that I'm doing worth it? And if not, when should I quit? If it is worth it, how much should I scale it? I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out.
There was a really good heuristic I heard a while back on a podcast. It was an interview with Scott Belsky, who I believe is at Adobe now, but an executive there and founder of a couple other companies. And it was like a product management podcast. And they were asking him, like, how do you know when you should keep going on something? And one of the things he said that is like the best answer, because that's the classic entrepreneurship question is how do you know when to stop and like when is enough validation? And one of the things that he said was if you are further down the road and you have increased your conviction about the problem set that you are solving, then it's time you need to keep going. But if the circumstances have changed where now know that either the problem isn't there or it will require a different means of solving, then you should cut ties as fast as possible. And I think that is probably one of the best ways that I've heard that described. And I think if I were in your shoes going down this journey and you're now like getting to the traction phase where you're making sales, to me, that sounds like more conviction, at least than before.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And then I think another thing to pile onto that is that conviction will still probably just feel like a gut call. It'll probably be pretty difficult to put a metric to that, but you'll just have to say, "Well, it sucks now, and it's probably gonna suck for a little while, but I feel like things are getting better." At least that's been my perspective. Because yeah, again, you could look at the metrics and they can always tell you a few different stories, and so it's very difficult to get to the ground truth, at least when you're definitely first starting out. But I always, even when there were times in which I just, like, absolutely wanted to quit, I always said, "No, like, we need to just see this thing up to the next phase, and then I can reassess. I'm on to something here, and I just need to keep on going."
Have there been any major, obviously there's been a lot of lessons, but has there been one or two lessons that are maybe more painful than the others or things that have really stuck out to you that you've really learned from building RecPak?
Yeah, I think one is I don't consider myself, like, an outgoing sales guy. Like, I don't like a ton of, like, pitching or, public speaking or anything like that, which is why it'll be funny when I do that on Friday. But as the CEO type, you need, like, that role is sales. And at the end of the day, no matter what, even if you're like a technical person, unless you come on with a co-founder that is the salesperson, you're the guy or gal for that. And so you need to get past your discomfort, which is something that I struggle with every day, where you literally, if you read all the entrepreneurial books and all of that, like all of the greats, they were just relentless. And you have to do it to a point at which you're probably a little embarrassed by the amount that you are out there. You have to say, "Man, I probably feel like I'm bugging this person, but I'm just gonna go for it," and send that email or make that call. Because it really it's a numbers game. A lot of people are gonna tell you no, and but if you believe in your product, there's probably something there, and so you just need to keep on going and doing that outreach and essentially selling yourself and selling your vision until you get enough people or the right person that can help make it happen. So that's the first big lesson. And then the second is, especially I talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's really difficult to find good help. And you don't realize, like, when you work for a company, it's an established entity, meaning that there's usually some kind of structure in place where a person is brought on and you say, "Okay, you're the whatever logistics person. So your tasks are X, Y, and Z, and that's just all you need to focus on." You don't realize just all of the things that need to happen in a company until you have to do every single one of them. And so at some point, sooner or later, you'll probably have to bring on help. You'll have to hire either full time, part time, whatever. And that is bringing on and working with others is a very difficult thing to do. Bringing on quality people who will care. It gets easier if you have more of a budget because you're just going to naturally be able to hire better people. But, or unless somebody really is in love with the idea and wants to come on as like an early employee and you give them equity or whatever. But chances are you're probably going to bring on somebody who's you're bringing on hourly or whatever. And it is, as I said, you have to be really on them and hold them accountable and all of that, and probably run through quite a few people before you find the right people. So yeah, just don't assume that when you bring people on that they are going to be able to do what you hope for them to do. That is a full-time job, just managing that.
Coming from a military background, we have a different taste of working with people in a somewhat professional, most of the time professional, but a lot of times not environment. Marine Corps, I don't know about you guys, like not, I don't know about that, but yeah, maybe in the middle. What was there anything that like has jumped out at you from your past work experience, even today, that has guided your hiring decisions or a litmus test for finding good people? I know that you're right in the middle of this, but like
Mhm.
military people, we like working with other vets for a reason and they tend to like collaborate well together, but that's hard to duplicate when maybe that's not who you have the pool to pick from.
Yeah. I guess my initial response was gonna be, "Oh, you find people who believe in the mission and have the drive and all of that." And you will always like, nobody in a job interview is ever, "Oh, yeah, you guys seem alright." Like, everybody always comes across as motivated and gung ho as you want them to be. Ultimately, though, I think that the lessons like, in the military, it is about accountability. So trusting but verifying, ensuring that you set specific objectives, that they understand what the mission is essentially, but then you are holding them accountable and ensuring that the task gets done. I think that's a basic foundation of being in the military. And it's really the same in any sort of environment in which you have people working for you. I think that is the most important thing, especially when you're first starting out, because you will probably be with people who are just, at least this is my experience, unless you have early employees that really, where things like mission and culture and all that come into play. And that will certainly be important when we get to our first hires. But right now, I just work with a team of contractors for every task. And it really is just about, yeah, just setting objectives and then accountability.
I like that. It's knowing what you're after and what you're looking to accomplish. You really have to have that nailed down. It's like you said, hiring people is very difficult because it's you bring them on and then they're just standing there with their hands up, like, okay, what do I do, boss? And you have to be like, if you don't have your systems laid out and squared away, it will become abundantly clear very fast.
So that's, yes, that is, I definitely agree with that for certain things. But so let's say, and again, I'm just going back to CPG because I guess that's what I know at this point. But let's say you've got your product. Let's say you make pens. You got these awesome pens. That's definitely true for the folks who are boxing the pens or doing some basic tasks for you. But the difficult thing is if you bring on a salesperson to who's going to go out and try and sell these pens in the pen market to pen customers. The tough thing is they're going to present themselves as quote unquote the expert because you don't really know anything about pen sales, and you're going to pay these people or pay this person whatever X amount per month, and they will say, okay, this is the feedback that I'm getting. These are the sales or whatever. And you just have no idea. I don't know. Are those sales everything that what they could be for somebody for the amount that I'm paying this person? Are they being truthful about the feedback because they want the job? Those are like the nuances that you end up really having to deal with because you're just so new to everything. And so that's just that's the salesperson. Maybe you also have, I don't know, the marketing person, and they have their own set of tasks and you don't know anything about marketing before. So they'll tell you things and you just have to make a value judgment about, are these things true, or is this where we need to be? And then you go down the line for every little thing that needs to happen and every person that you bring on. And pretty soon you're like, this is what it's like to run an organization where I don't know what I don't know. And that's most things. So, oh, I guess that's the other thing is just, man, be prepared to just make mistakes all the time. Yeah. And just live in that uncertainty.
The
So,
joys of entrepreneurship, you get to like literally just crash and burn a lot. And then you also have to be responsible for every element of the company in things
yep,
that you've never done before and probably never will do.
exactly. So, yeah, the goal is just to grow enough where you can bring on good people, have good processes, and then you can be like, okay, give me the high level stuff, salesperson, but I don't need to go super deep.
No, that's great. And I think that the energy that you personally bring to the table will be felt in the people and will be touching the people that you interact with. And I hope that finding people that kind of share that same mission focus that you have and like giving back to vets and doing all of those things is, I think it's abundantly clear to me. So I really dig that.
Yeah, we haven't talked about company mission and culture and all of that. I don't think the culture of RecPak at this point is just me and how I'm feeling that day. But all of that really will be important if you have co-founders or you are lucky enough to have first hires and whatnot. I also want to acknowledge that I have just been talking about when you find somebody off the internet and bring them on as a temp kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a whole new dynamic when you're working with them and they've got maybe a significant stake in your company and you really need to work it out.
Yeah, and that's where all the lessons learned in the military with capital L leadership and all that come into play. I wouldn't say that I'm like a leader of these contractors. I'm more of a manager.
One of the things that you had been telling me about is your focus on trying to give back to the veteran population and serve them in a unique way. Obviously, of course, ideating from where the idea for RecPak came to be. Talk to me about that social part of your mission in terms of giving back. And I know that you had mentioned something about Ukraine as well in terms of and donating over there.
Yeah. So when I first started the idea, again, it was never really with the intention of, oh, I've got this idea that's gonna make me super wealthy at, some point in the future. Just because one is everybody has their own motivations, but for me, that's not mine. And then two is unless you really have a strong understanding of that idea and the market size is huge and whatnot, it is there are easier ways of making money than starting your own thing. In fact, you should just be prepared to lose money for the foreseeable future, or at least not get paid. So, I always wanted to do some sort of, whether that's like a Paul Newman type model where you donate all profits to a cause, or something more interesting than just a regular company. And so when Ukraine kicked off, I realized that if my long-term goal was supporting the US, ultimately like the US soldiers or firefighters or whoever on the ground, that might take a little while longer. But I think I personally am very passionate about what's going on over there. I've had a few friends that are really involved in efforts, and pretty much right when we launched or right after we launched, I made just a personal pledge that I would do what I could with donating to folks, whether that is soldiers on the front line or emergency first responders. I partner with a couple aid organizations Atlas Global and Allied Extract. And I actually have a family friend at another one where I'm gearing up for another large contribution. But I essentially thought for if I could contribute to this cause that I felt was just, that would have made all of this worth it. And so we've donated so far almost 1,000, or excuse me, 5,000 packs to efforts over there, whether that is ambulance drivers, soldiers on the front line in Bakhmut, or they were actually also passing out RecPak to civilians who got caught up in the dam break a few months back. So that's one cause. That's not something that I like. We've made a couple posts, but that's not something that I've advertised really, or that's not something that like I want to make like the face of the company. I just could do that for what I hope will is just purely altruistic purposes. And then also, I have quite a few, or oftentimes folks will reach out and say, I'm part of this veteran organization, whether that is the, excuse me, the Brotherhood Riders that raises money for, it's like this bike ride in Florida that raises money for public safety officers that have fallen in the line of duty, or the North Dakota, I think it's North Dakota National Guard, Black Hills Endurance March, and there's a few others. I don't have a budget that I can contribute financially, but I always make an effort if people reach out and they say, I have this awesome cause that's usually around veterans or first responders. Can you help out? And I'm happy to provide product for that. And then the last thing is I love the outdoors. I like enjoy spending as much time as I can out there. And so I do think there is I feel an obligation to help out in some way on the conservation or environmental side. We are a member of 1% for the planet, and which means that I pledged to donate at least 1% of our revenue to conservation causes. That's just getting started. I have to figure out what that looks like in the longer term, but that's like the other pillar of how I see giving back.
I think all three of those areas are super inspiring, and I appreciate and enjoy meeting people that are looking to optimize for, I don't want to say unique, but like different than the average. And so I have a ton of respect for that. And those are extremely noble causes as an outdoorsman myself, and also of that, like appreciate and respect those a ton. So from me, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate that.
This has been a really good conversation, Deed. I enjoyed learning about the CPG space, RecPak, and everything that you are doing. We'll call it disrupt the soylent market. That might actually be a great title for this episode. What can myself or the listeners do to be useful to you?
Less useful to me and more can help you guys, especially because I know that most of your, or I would expect that quite a few of your viewers are active duty or veterans. So just note that whether you are active duty, a veteran, a first responder, a teacher, and that includes a guide, like a mountain guide, or a student, we offer a 20% permanent discount. So just reach out to me for that. And then also for your viewers, I'll offer 50% off their first purchase. So for all of that, you can reach out to hello@recpack.co. Reach out anytime. And then, yeah, it just helps spread the word about our small business. And I always love feedback. And if you are an entrepreneur or a veteran or active duty, and you're just trying to figure out your way in life, I also have quite a bit of experience in tech companies as well. Yeah, if you just want to get some sort of guidance or just chat about stuff, I'm always around. You can email me at that same email address. I check it often and we'll get something on the calendar.
That's awesome. I'll include all of those links, email address, and link to RecPak in the show notes. Deed, I really appreciate your time, man. This has been good.
Yeah, thanks, man. This has been awesome. Great talking to you.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. Your listenership helps me better educate people like you and the rest of our nation's military, both past and present, on building a successful life outside of military service. If you're looking for more ways the top vets are leading more effective lifestyles, building businesses, and using the resources designed specifically for you, press here for a selection of some of the best clips. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date, and I will be talking with you soon.